What's up, everybody? Welcome to Memo, Meadow's monthly podcast that charts recent changes and trends in the cannabis industry. I'm your host, David Hua, CEO and co-founder of Meadow. Once a month, I sit down with cannabis dispensary and delivery operators to explore trends and hear insight into what's happening at the retail level of this growing industry. At Meadow, we build a full suite of cannabis retail software combining point of sale, delivery, cannabis marketing, compliance, inventory management, analytics, and more in a single, easy-to-use platform. Today, I sit down with Trent McCurren, co-founder and president at the WellFlower Group, the first dispensary in Michigan to be powered by Meadow. After 8 years of building the best cannabis retail software for California, Meadow has expanded into our second state, and we couldn't be happier to be launching in Michigan. In this conversation, Trent and I explore the state of legal cannabis in Michigan, the rollout of the medical and recreational markets, what's selling, why prices are dropping, and what is needed to help the Michigan cannabis industry thrive. Before we dive in, it's time to smoke some cannabis. Okay, time to smoke some cannabis. I did not get any flower from Michigan, unfortunately, so I did my best to embody what I would buy potentially in Michigan. We know that WellFlower focuses on local, small craft farmers. I ended up getting delivery from one of our dispensary partners, nice guys. They've been making some of their own flower with some partners. We have Middle Eel Farms. This is just some runts. We have modified grapes. I bought some Maven minis. They are amazing. Today, we are smoking Brother David's, one of my favorite brands of flower. All right, we're twisting one up. This is what we got. Oh, that's nice. Okay, this is in honor of us celebrating our second state, powered by Meadow, Michigan. Thank you, WellFlower, for reaching out and bringing us this opportunity. Super smooth. What's nice is not high THC. It's about 20%, and it feels great. It's nice and euphoric. It's relaxing. You know, it's been tough finding lower THC, but really high terpene levels, and that's a lot of times what I prefer for an everyday sesh. This definitely fits the bill. Thank you, Brother David's. Thank you, nice guys, and for bringing this over. Thank you, WellFlower, for jumping in this Meadow memo. Thank you, Trent, for joining me here today. You are the co-founder and president of the WellFlower Group, and you are a vertically integrated Michigan dispensary group that you co-founded with your cousin, Dr. Rob, who used to be a former emergency room physician and healthcare executive. I would love to hear your story. Tell me a little bit about your background, how you got going. You have such a varied past, but when I look and connect the dots, it actually makes a lot of sense. So please share your origin story.
Well, you beat me to the punch. I was actually going to say it looks varied, but there is a through line there, which I can try to briefly talk about. Of course, covering what I guess I'm almost at 20 years of professional experience at this point. It's hard to do in a nutshell. But I started in big Fortune 500 CPG, which was like General Mills up in Minneapolis. And that gave me a good, I think, grounding as to what would later become my full-on career in marketing. So I did category management there, which you guys are probably familiar with, analyzing all the sales data and consumer trends for our best and biggest customers, Kroger's, Walmart's, et cetera. But I really wanted to get into marketing, and you basically have to have an MBA to get into marketing and CPG. So I went back and got my MBA at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill and came out of there into brand management with Johnson & Johnson up in the New Jersey, New York City area. I worked in their consumer products division on Johnson's Baby, as a matter of fact. So I worked on the lotion and the wash, baby wash, the No More Tears. And that got me really good training in brand management, a lot of the marketing fundamentals, and great leadership training that J&J offers. But I knew when I went to J&J, I was not long for Fortune 500 world for a variety of reasons, which I won't bore you guys with now. But so I knew I was going to probably jump to something else, and I wanted to go to someplace smaller with the idea I wanted a more personal feel, and I wanted more direct relationships with my leadership and more direct impact on decisions and strategic making decisions. And so I left J&J after about 14 or 15 months and went and became brand manager for a wine and spirits company that was family owned called Deutsch Family Wine and Spirits. But they had big brands. So I kind of got the both worlds. I got enough money to play with to have a decent marketing budget, but also got a really tight knit family. It was family owned. I was talking to the CEO and owners probably weekly, if not daily. My brands there were Yellowtail Wine, which everybody probably knows. That was a really big brand. And I loved it there. It was probably some of the happiest times. Not that I haven't been happy anywhere else, but just really was pleased with my time there. I had really good leaders there, a really good manager there. They all came from like P&G and Gallo. And so they had great pedigrees and were super smart and super sharp and great communicators. I hope they're listening to this at some point. And I loved it. But I had also had, this is the through line. I'd always wanted to try to get into entrepreneurship. So as you see, and as you'll continue to hear, I kept going smaller and smaller, trying to get to more startup environments. And so I was happy at Deutsch Family Wine and Spirits, but had an opportunity to come be the head of marketing at Founders Brewing in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where I'm sitting today. And so I made that hard choice to leave the place I loved and go take on a brand new role in a fairly newish company, a smallish company, to lead up their marketing department in a professional fashion. So I did that for about 4.5 years and built out that marketing department, built out their marketing acumen. I think I did a good job. But, and then I was just kind of ready for my next step. I wanted to go try to do my own thing. And that's when cannabis was getting spun up here in Michigan. And my cousin Rob, he was, I can talk about him a little more, but he'd had some personal experiences with cannabis that made him, for altruistic reasons, want to get into cannabis. Knowing the power of the plant from some of his personal experiences, and needed a partner. And I was, kind of maybe considering my next step at that point anyway. And so I made the jump. I left Founders and started this in like late 2018 with Rob. I would say in earnest, incorporating, creating the company, starting to apply for permits kind of started in December 2018, January 2019. And 2-person company. I think now we're at 50 to 60 employees, maybe it's about to go to 70 or 80 with our new dispensary. So it's come a long way.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I love about your story is that altruistic origin story with the combination of the startup entrepreneur know-how. Right. I mean, that's very similar to us in a lot of ways.
Well, sometimes I don't think I have the know-how, that's for sure.
Well, who does?
Right.
It's kind of like we're building the plane while we fly it, and we're also looking at everyone else and seeing how they're building the plane. And well, maybe we should do it that way, but you kind of have to just run your own race.
Right.
But one thing I do also like that you've taken an approach in really some core values on an intention around cannabis. You just held an expungement event a couple months ago, and I'd love to hear more about, as you build a WellFlower, what those core values are and how you're thinking about, as you grow, the culture that you're cultivating there. Because we all know everyone, at least in the industry, this has been an unjust war on drugs. A lot of people have been incarcerated and still have records. There's a lot of room to go to heal and move forward. And we have to look to the past to right some of those wrongs. And you've done a lot of that, and I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. I've always been a big proponent of corporate social responsibility, just because, I do think it adds value to your business. And I think there's a lot of quantitative and data that supports that. It's just the right thing to do. And so it's always been a passion of mine. And I think it will pay off long term, maybe not short term. Expungement of cannabis records is obviously a big one for the topic and for the industry, and very relevant, as well as, the issue of incarceration for drugs and getting people out of jail who are in jail for marijuana. And so we have been very intentional about how we commit to those causes and how we go about supporting those causes. And I think we've gotten better over time. I think the best example I can give is our Ypsilanti opening of that store. We went in there saying we want to choose one charitable partner that we go deep with, instead of maybe spreading out a bunch of charitable partners. I also wanted to be very intentional to align with their goals and not just come in and just donate money or something like that. And so I can talk a lot about our partner there. It's the We the People Opportunity Farm, who is an organization that helps to break the cycle of incarceration. And so they take people who are formerly incarcerated, put them as interns on their farm, and teach them life skills to be productive members of the farm and help make that a success. But then the dual purpose of the farm is they also address and this is a nice to have, they address the urban food desert problem of people not being able to have access to healthy and homegrown food in urban areas. And so we've asked them, what is important to you? How can we do more than just donate money to you? So we're kind of working on 3 big things right now. One is obviously donating money. So we're going to choose days that are We the People days. But they also want to humanize the people that they work with. And so we've created a little merchandising area in our store that's, I think, going up right now, if it's not up already, to where we sell their wares. And that raises money for them, but also raises awareness of their organization. And then we're also working on, and this is their request, to do a nice little graphic of one of their interns so people can understand, hey, these are real people and they feel humanized and not objectified in terms of how they're trying to come back into society. The last thing we're working on is trying to actually do something about that with the resources we have. And that means employing people who maybe are formerly incarcerated, maybe had records. And so we're working with the resources that We the People gave us, and they gave us a number of ones, including their own orbit of people, their former interns, existing interns, that we are now prioritizing them as the first place we go with job postings. And so we're hoping to bring in some people and give opportunities to people who have been incarcerated for whatever reason or formerly have records, give them a chance to make money and have a job.
That's great. It's like you hitting it from all sides, and now you have a bench to pull from. And that workforce development and bringing people full circle into something that they love, that they went to jail for, it's great. I love that. You entered in 2018, and California at that time, we were just getting into 64. We went from Prop 215 to 64. I can only imagine the journey that you've been on and the journey that we've been on. And now you're expanding from 1 store to 3. You're switching from trees to Meadow as you expand your retail. You're our first partner in Michigan, and you found us. I don't know how you found us, but can you talk about, you were very convincing, because we were really just focused on California, and you're like, no, like, come to Michigan. And, we did. We really value partnership. Would love just to think about why you needed us to come through, or where do you see this going in your expansion as you now have secured your labor, and how you're thinking about your expansion. Now think about the tech side.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I actually, I was a salesperson for you. I reached out and said, I wanted you guys. Yeah. And I think I did it over a couple of different channels. I think over Instagram and email. And then I found
you did. You're super persistent. We're like, all right, this guy's not going away.
Yeah, right.
Let's go talk to him.
Well, it speaks to the landscape of the tech solutions in cannabis. There's so many to choose from. I don't think there's, one really awesome solution, but I mean, obviously I think Meadow's great. The reason I wanted to find another solution is because the biggest pain points for us were, at least for me personally, was data analysis. So like I come from the CPG world, as I mentioned, I'm used to having my Nielsen data, my IRI data, and all kinds of data sources that I can slice and dice in whichever way I want. And I just could not find that in any of the cannabis solutions that we were seeing. And Meadow has done the best job at giving that to us, not only in, predetermined dashboards that you guys make easy and flashy for us to understand on the fly, but I can also go real deep in my analysis by just doing data dumps, which, seems like a easy solution to have, but for some reason it's not common to find. And so that was one big selling point for us. The other one, and you mentioned it in our talk before, is that, the compliance part, you want someone with a track record of compliance so your POS doesn't get you into trouble you shouldn't be in to begin with. And so having really strong programs that have the built-in regulations and understanding of the regulations that raise the red flags if you are doing something that's non-compliant, like selling over the limit of a transaction, is super important, and that takes stress off of me and less things for me to do. And so really, I think, if I had to summarize it, it's based on the fact that I can get so many more insights out of Meadow than I could out of some of the other solutions.
And when you look at these insights, how are you sort of implementing that? Like, you are such a fascinating operator because of this CPG background and analysis. Can you reveal some of the things that you are looking at and how you're implementing it in your day-to-day, and or your inventory management, or your operations?
Right. Well, I will admit, I don't think we've done the best job. Of course, we've only been with Meadow now since like April, right? I think.
Yeah.
But we're putting the plans in place. I would say probably the biggest example is we're using the data out of Meadow to create audiences for targeted programmatic advertising, which, we're doing with another firm, but, we're using geofencing, and we're using the POS data combined with their other data pools to do targeted online digital display ads. And so I would say that's probably the biggest way we're leveraging it right now. The other thing we're doing is overlaying the data out of Meadow with our SEO optimization. So trying to understand if are the things we're doing with SEO, are those translating into in-store actions like we think they are? Of course, like, location's the easiest one, or, the searches we're getting out of our native zip codes, so people from other cities or whatever, are they actually translating into sales of those people coming in? And does that data sing the same tune, so to speak? I think those are the biggest ones. And then we're getting better now. We're gradually improving, like you talked about, as we build the plane, at targeting our promos now based on the data coming out of Memo too.
That's great. One thing, as we were looking at Michigan and getting in there, it had a lot of similarities around California. So it made the jump over much easier, and having a wonderful partner that was committed and would reciprocate feedback so we can continue to build a product that you need was really helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So far the journey has been solid, and now we're talking, and I'm looking forward to the road ahead. But the road ahead is a little choppy, right? It's, in California, similar to Michigan, we don't really have a limit on licenses, but we have counties that have prohibited it. In California, in Michigan, you're going through this change of, well, you were a lot medical and now you're adding adult use. In California, our medical program is pretty much being gutted because of a high barrier to getting a card, not a lot of incentive to get it, really. And why not just get it on the adult use side?
Right.
So some shops have been struggling on the medical. Now we're going a recreational or adult use. How do you think about this transition where you are right now at this time, and the differentiation of WellFlower with the landscape that you're dealing with?
Okay. Well, one distinction I make too, and I talk to people here in the state, is when I'm talking medical, I'm not necessarily either talking medical license holders or medical card holders. I'm thinking more of like their use states, or why they use it, right? Their needs. So there are medical users that buy on adult use side because they have chosen not to renew their medical card or whatever. So the medical needs are still out there, but I do think the medical market is going away, which I think that's obvious to everyone. It's just not, I can't think of a single operator that's committed to medical use unless they're in a place that's only medical. The city's only opted in medical. So that is for sure going to go away at some point. I have to imagine the state's going to merge them. I actually thought it would have happened last year, in last year's legislative session. I thought it was going to happen and didn't. And I think that's because of two reasons. This is interesting too, probably different a little bit in California, is because Detroit and Traverse City, Detroit's obviously our biggest city. Traverse City is our third largest, I think. Neither one of those had opted into adult use yet. So if they had gotten rid of the medical market, those two biggest municipalities would have been without cannabis. So I think once Traverse City goes, Detroit just went to AU, Traverse City is probably going to go, I think, this fall. I think we'll see a movement on the state level to go to all AU. But in terms of our differentiation, we kind of molded ourselves on a wellness platform, given our background with Dr. Rob and me, because I do think cannabis is more of a wellness industry than like alcohol, where I was before. So that's a major difference, which I know you mentioned that before too, but cannabis actually has medicinal benefits and wellness benefits, and so you're catering to two different kinds of markets and in between, or consumer segments, I should say. You've got the hardcore medical users that really use it for acute reasons, pain, appetite stimulation, whatever. Then you've got just purely recreational people that are just trying to get stoned as much as they can. And then you got people in between who may not have an acute medical reason, but can't sleep well or whatever, right? And so it's more of a wellness benefit, kind of the line of like supplements or gummies or supplemental gummies, stuff like that. So we kind of crafted our brand on the wellness, hence the name, and still think we can do that. But I do think the market's not mature enough to where you can survive on just that. So you are kind of forced into being one thing for all people, which will change over time as the market grows bigger and different types of consumers come into the market. But right now we differentiate ourselves obviously with the wellness aspect, but in terms of the products we bring in. So we try to focus on the smaller homegrown Michigan companies and brands as opposed to the multi-state big brands, which I won't name any names, but our growers for sure. On the flower side, we for sure try to focus on some of the mom and pop type growers that are smaller output but have really good quality. and we highlight them. We tell them this is why we carry them. These two came from the former caregiver system, and they're now in the legal market. They grow great flower. Their money starts in Michigan and stays in Michigan. And so those are the kind of brands we support. And I think the combination of the quality of their product along with the inherent commitment to Michigan that they bring makes them a more attractive brand to the consumers. Now, admittedly, there's a learning curve there, and we have to educate people on this, and that's proving harder than I thought. But I still think that's what differentiates us from some of the other product selections that I see out there is we're very intentional about what we bring in. And then the other thing I would just say lastly is our stores, if you see pictures of them or been in them, are unique, and we're not trying to be unique for the sake of unique. We're trying to create a comfortable environment, and we say they're kind of modeled after our living rooms, which they truly are. They look like Rob's living room and a little bit of mine. But yeah, there's a record player in there, and so the goal is to we're not trying to herd you in and out like cattle. We're trying to teach you about cannabis if you don't know about it. But if you do, you can also get in and out quick. So
with the medical side, we've been thinking a lot about how to save it or re-energize it in California. I mean, before going into Prop 64 in California, we had a $2.7 billion medical market. And what was interesting is a lot more of the focus was on what you were talking about, wellness, pain, all of that. And the narrative changed. In 64, we're seeing way more high potency, driving value, the recreational adult use side, without necessarily adhering to what brought us here in the first place. Mm-hmm. And what we have is some things, and I really have to credit Senator Wiener for it. We have a compassion program. If you have a recommendation or what we call an MMIC card, you can get free compassion programs. And if you have the MMIC card, you can get state sales tax deduction. Mm-hmm. However, the state card costs money. You have to go through a whole thing, and there's only 1,700 people in the state that have it. Yeah. So, what we're looking at is how do you get some incentive? Maybe it's the recommendation that gets people back the state sales tax, because we have 30 to 40% tax on top of what you're getting at the wholesale. I mean, what are you seeing on your side, or is it just abandon the medical? Because here the licenses are one. Adult and medical when you bring them on, whereas you have to kind of stage up two different licensing structures, and it's quite redundant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it adds way too much complexity. That's why I don't like it. On the ops side, it does. I think people are doing what you're talking about in California. The operators are doing it on their own. So I can't think of any dispensary that doesn't offer a 10% discount to all medical card holders. So because our excise tax is 10%, so it's not 30 to 40 like California. So they are getting the benefits of their medical card, of having something that would justify a medical card on the AU side if they choose not to renew their medical card in terms financially. The one thing they lose on the AU side that they don't get on the medical side is high potency stuff. So your THC limit on the medical side is much higher than it is on the AU side. For example, I think with edibles, you can go up to 200 milligrams of THC in a individual unit, but you can't on the AU side. It's 100 milligrams. So they do lose on that. I do think the CRA, our state regulatory body, does model themselves a lot after the learnings of Colorado, California, Washington, Oregon, et cetera. And so I do think they would probably, or I'd like to think they are aware enough that they would maybe try to do something like you're talking about with the compassion program. If they do get rid of medical, there's some way to duplicate that, hey, I would have a medical card if one still existed. And then dispensaries can offer those kind of benefits of free or discounted product for the people that really need cannabis. And, it's essentially an everyday thing for them.
It's so challenging because we don't have insurance that pays for the product. It's more expensive. Mm-hmm. You have friction here on sort of where people are at. And you're like, okay, how do you incentivize people to do it? But then you look at sort of the stats. Overdoses on opioids. I think we hit 117,000 deaths last year.
Yeah.
Like the number one killer in the country. Like gun violence, drunk driving is way lower with 30,000, 33,000 each. Mm-hmm. And when you look at a state that adds the medical cannabis or legalizes it, that overdose deaths drops right off a cliff to 20, 25%.
Right.
And you'd think, especially with what's going on post-pandemic and mental wellness, that we would give as much cannabis out as possible. Let it rain.
Right.
So we can start, moving the trends back. So
well, sorry, an interesting fact that Dr. Rob brings up, and it was new to me, was that cannabis is one of the few substances that has virtually zero toxicity. You can't overdose on it. You might feel really bad if you take too much, but you can't overdose. You won't die from it. You can die from Tylenol. You can die from water, milk, from taking too much of those. But cannabis is one of the safest things you can do. So
yeah, and I've definitely had some of those experiences where I've had a gummy, and it's a little bit more.
Right.
So you touched on the CRA, and what do you, in your opinion, did Michigan do right? And what could have gone better in your rollout? And it's still rolling out. So I'm curious and sort of where you're at.
Yeah, man, that's a tough one because those regulators don't have an easy job. So like, I have a hard time bashing them. Not that we are bashing them, but criticizing them because it's just such a nascent industry for all of us. I think some of the things they did right, but they also have downsides. Is they did go unlimited at the state level, so I do think that levels the playing field for smaller operators. Whereas you see states where they have limited licenses at the state level, and it generally seems to me that you see the well-capitalized bigger companies are the ones who benefit from that.
MSOs.
Yep. And I also think it slows down the overall process because there tends to be a lot of litigation around those processes, particularly if there's scoring rubrics happening. And so I think the launch of cannabis happens at a slower pace when you have limited license at the state level. So I like that they did it. However, the flip side is now, I mean, our market, I don't know how much everybody that, listens to this or you know about Michigan, but our market's is tumultuous right now. And there's a lot of nervousness with operators that aren't well capitalized. So the smaller ones and the mid-sized ones, which I kind of consider as mid-sized, who don't have a ton of capital behind us, are really sweating right now because the prices are plummeting so much because supply is outpacing demand. Supply growth is outpacing demand growth, something like 4x or something like that. And so you're seeing people act really irrationally because they're committed to staying in and they have no choice. So they're selling at cost or below cost just to get cash in the door. You have bigger players that I believe are pursuing the strategy of selling below cost or at cost to push the smaller operators out who cannot survive. And so what I'm getting at is if the state had limited licenses at the state level, it would have prevented this irrational rush. And I'm not even sure I would recommend they do that if we were to go do this all again. But perhaps, as I was thinking about this question, I don't know if more education can happen at the state level before someone applies, because somebody who's really risking all their retirement fund or whatever on this and maybe doesn't have a good view of the market is going to get screwed. And there's not a lot of data out there. The state owns a lot of the data on what is happening in the market, and it's not necessarily easy to find. And so I do wonder if, more education for some of these smaller operators would prevent them from jumping into a market that they can't survive in. The other thing I would say that hasn't gone well is I don't think the state is staffed up enough to manage this large of a market. So I'm fairly convinced, like 90% convinced, that there's a lot of out-of-state flower coming in from your state, making its way into the market. And to me, it seems like it'd be easy to catch, but, I'm also not a regulator and I don't, live in that world, but that's happening and that's contributing to some of the price drops and the tumultuous nature of the market right now. And I just think there's, we're super compliant and are, don't test the waters whatsoever, but there are a lot that do. And I'm hoping that someday our compliance, attention to compliance will pay off. But right now, sometimes it feels like it doesn't, because you got people that are able to scrape by and get a little more cash in the door by potentially not being compliant.
We have many of the same challenges in California. I mean, we have we issued way more agricultural cultivation licenses than we did on the retail side. I mean, order of magnitude in a lot of ways.
Right.
And we're dealing with still 60% of the state that doesn't have any commercial cannabis activity. And
we're like two, or maybe less, I think, actually.
Yeah, you're less. But we also deal with the illicit market as well, or unregulated market. And we also have operators that may be on the regulated side, but are double dipping into the unregulated. And it's tough. It's a tough situation because, we don't want to see sort of a prohibition 2.0, war on drugs 2.0. The imbalance of the supply chain is caused by these abrupt swings in price that we have no control on, no future contracts. The consumer still isn't as educated on the product. and margins are so thin because of our restrictions on 280E and all of this. And we're like, and we still are like, yay, cannabis! It's still coming in this. But my hope is, with time, those things do go away, and it provides that lift that we're all looking for. But until then, it is really survival of the fittest.
Right.
People that really have good operating margins or know-how. We found that people that have really streamlined labor, and that labor is multi-talented in doing front of house, back of house, all that, really having good buying and inventory, and tripling down on repeat loyalty on different demographics of people. Mm-hmm. And I think what we're also seeing is some verticalization. I mean, for you have this verticalized platform where you are creating some of your own edibles or some of your own flower. You want to speak to how you're thinking about creating some of these products in a world where you're squeezing more, getting more margin, but you're also taking on the overhead of producing and manufacturing all this.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's hard right now too is, generally speaking, a lot of us are making the same product. It's not to say there aren't differences, right, and subtle features and benefits that are better. But generally speaking, we're making a lot of the same stuff. And so that's where vertical integration becomes even more important, because now I just can put the stuff in my stores and it's going to serve the need just like any other brand. So it's funny you bring up the interoperability of your labor, because we definitely do that on the ops side. We need to get better on the retail side, but the ops side, we're cross-trained on everything. And so we're able to flex our staff between whatever we're doing, or whatever sold better that month. And so I can bring people from my grow over to my lab if I have to, or vice versa. And so we have seen benefits of that. And I think the reason our vertical integration is so important right now, and why we're leaning on it even more, is because because of the immaturity of the consumer education. It's a lot of just cost benefit analysis on their end. So they're looking at price to THC ratio. And so you're starting to see just this big price game, price and volume. It's like, everybody's trying to be Walmart. Weed by selling a ton of volume at low margin. And so we were able to do that because I can do it with my own stuff. And so we're starting to pull on that lever a little more than we were in the past. And I think we have to do that to survive. The other thing with our own brands that I think potentially differentiates us, and I guess the market will determine if I'm right or wrong, but is I do think we've been very intentional about making our brands mean something to someone. Now, whether we chose the right someone is another choice, or another question. But I come from the training that if you're everything to everyone, you're nothing. So choose a niche and go after it. And hopefully you choose the most valuable niche. The one that's got the most buying power, et cetera. We try to do that with our brands, that we have. Each brand targets somewhat of a different segment in consumer need and consumer behavior, so that we're kind of dabbling in all the different consumer segments out there, kind of like the P&G of weed in some respects. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. The branding side's so fascinating to me, because you're right. There is not that much differentiation in some of these products, and at least in California, we went full final packaged good, where consumer only can see what's in the package and on it, and really can't necessarily open it and check it out. We also had this myth where the soccer mom was going to come in and buy up everything when legalization happened, and stores positioned themselves for it, but it ultimately still went back to high THC consumers, value purchasers, and that's been a struggle. Because we know the medical benefits of that we're looking for some of these lower potency purchasers, but they're not necessarily coming in. And I'm curious, the fact that you have this sort of living room environment, you have Dr. Rob, that you may be able to buck that trend way better than some of these others by being able to bring people that maybe not as discerning on the cost, but way more on the benefit side and how you're positioning your brand.
Right. Well, I think we're doing that now. It's just that they're not enough. There's not enough of them.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we're able to do it. We're coming to the same conclusion you are of that. And not that we were necessarily not trying to attract, I don't mean this in a derogatory term, but the stoners. We want the stoners.
We are stoners. It's all good.
But I think I think we're coming to the same conclusion that those are more important than we thought they were. Not that we didn't think they were important. But yeah, that segment's just way more important. The wellness ones, or the soccer mom type people, that's just not here. And I don't think it's going to be here until, 5-10 years.
5-10 years?
That's what it feels like. I mean,
What?
I feel like it's going to take the current 20-year-olds who are maybe even younger than that, who are used to cannabis legalization, for that to happen.
Wow.
In any major way.
Wow. I mean, let's talk a little bit more about that. So here we are. We're in 2022. We've been doing this for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at by 2030. Here's this arc. And I mean, we're still evolving. You said it's pretty nascent. We're early. Brands are going to come and go. If you look at alcohol and, the end of Prohibition in that era, the bootleggers and, we were still staging up all these micro regional breweries. Brands still haven't really started yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where do you think we are then in terms of like production or like branding or the consumer as we go through this decade and sort of the milestones that you think we may hit?
Well, I'd be interested in what the tipping point metric is, right? I think what did we just see this? I saw a graph or something. Oh, it's for electric vehicle adoption in the U.S. I don't know if you saw this. I think I saw it on Twitter yesterday or 2 days ago. That finally the U.S. has hit the 5% adoption rate or mark or something like that. And that's typically the tipping point for other countries when electric car adoption really takes off. And so as I've thought about this with alcohol, the difference with alcohol, I think, even before Prohibition, and then what Prohibition was like 10 years or 15 years, something like that.
Yep.
Before it came back. But there was an awareness and familiarity with alcohol, before Prohibition happened. And so there was already just knowledge and people were used to it. The difference with cannabis, I think, and I compare it to craft beer a lot too, is that cannabis, nobody, except for the people who are really committed and were using cannabis beforehand, everybody else just doesn't know enough about it. They're intimidated by it. There's stigma around it. And I think that stigma is hard to shake for people who are, have always had it be an illegal drug. And so you're starting with a category that is kind of unknown to the vast majority of end consumers. Whereas with alcohol, and if I think about beer specifically and what craft beer did, people already knew what beer was when craft beer came along. Craft beer was just doing beer better in a different way and bringing back old brewing techniques and old styles. So there wasn't this hump of getting people to accept it because they already knew what beer and alcohol was. Now with Soccer Mom, et cetera, they have to accept it and get around their nervousness of bad experiences and the illegality. And I think that social stigma just takes a long time to change. That's why I say maybe the teens right now, are like the ones that are gonna put us over the hump because they've lived with it. It's just like the internet, right? They've lived with it. And mobile phones, they've lived with it, so it's nothing new.
Maybe it's like we have this whole California sober thing happening here. I'm not sure if it's going on in Michigan, but we have way less people consuming alcohol.
Yeah.
Even when I go to a dinner party or an outing, people are either smoking on a vape or eating a gummy rather than hitting the bar. And, I think we've established a really solid sort of retail environment experience.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side that I'm really sort of looking at now is the consumption experience, the social consumption, the private consumption, the event consumption. And, where I frame that is any place that alcohol is sold. I mean, we just talked where, liquor stores, right? As synonymous to some sort of dispensary model. But when you go to a bar, when you go to an event, when you go to a beer garden, that's
Mm-hmm.
all there. When I go to a wedding, we're starting to see you have your bar line, but now you have your weed spread, and it's just there. And I think that I'm really hopeful for that switch to happen. Some sort of piece is going to push that over the edge,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to marry that other half where all of a sudden, I mean, we already have it already in a lot of ways. We're at a festival, someone's smoking a joint, you pass it over, you're like, oh, I do like this. I'm going to get my own. Or someone gives you a gummy and you're like,
Yeah.
I'm going to try it. So I'm hopeful in that sort of social change.
Yeah.
The consumption lounges here in California have been a little bit slow to start. But if you look at a place like Amsterdam, man, the coffee shops really were a hub for people to meet, smoke,
Right.
and hang out.
Right.
We're also seeing more events being open to cannabis-specific sales areas.
Mm-hmm.
But in a lot of ways, you're right. We're still so early. We haven't, in my mind, had the Coca-Cola moment either,
Mm-hmm.
where you have some specific formulation or strain or something that's consistent the whole way through, regardless of any market that you go in.
Right.
and so like that stuff still feels so early from
Yeah.
the early innings side. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, so I see hope for that. I also see hope, like, we still have no federal legalization yet.
Right.
Mexico is legal or decriminalized, and we're going to see that.
Yeah.
EU is looking at it. I mean, from a global perspective, there's still so much.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Like, when you look at like these other tipping points that provide that scale,
Mm-hmm.
are there other things that keep you have an optimistic or outlook?
Well, I'm definitely optimistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Or
Yeah.
hopeful, or like
Right. Well, yeah, and one comment I'll say too is Michigan, I think it's probably a victim of its own conservatism. We're obviously more conservative here than in California and even around us, right? So that whole consumption switch with cannabis at weddings and stuff, that'd be awesome to see here. But I think it would take longer than maybe it did for California. But I think my reasons for optimism is I do think when federal legalization happens and there can be national brands, that will play a part. And it will also reduce the stigma too, because there's still just so much apprehension around something that's federally illegal that I think it's preventing even people that are comfortable with it at the state level from fully indulging it and being open about their indulgence of it. There's still a lot of closeted indulgence from, I think, the soccer mom type people.
Yeah, what's interesting is we had this whole essential cannabis piece that came through the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
where stores, dispensaries still open right next to hospitals and other essential workers.
Right.
And I think that was a huge paradigm shift for us. And we're still kind of feeling the effects of this post-pandemic world. But
Right.
from my perspective, the genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah.
It's just about how to get it into more people's hands and show it the right way and the culture. And I really appreciate operators like you that have such a well-intentioned perspective but still executing on a high level that make sure we'll be around as we continue to go through the next innings here.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, that wraps it up. I really appreciate your time here. I look forward to continuing the journey with you in Michigan and beyond.
Yeah.
And it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I guess if it doesn't work out for the WellFlower, I can always come be a sales rep for Meadow.
I hope that's not the case, but sure.
Yeah,
right?
I always thought you did. Yeah.
I'd rather see 20 WellFlowers and grow that way than
Yes.
And that's kind of what I'm looking at.
Yeah, same.
I mean, it's possible. As more stores close, there's still people that are going to have to buying cannabis.
Right.
Someone's going to be serving them.
Yeah.
And it's still, there's just the stats on businesses, 3-5 years in, most businesses close 70% or something like that.
Right.
And in cannabis, we're still seeing a lot of this still rolling through.
Yep. It's gonna be attrition in Michigan, I think, for the next year at least.
Yeah, we're seeing that here too.
Yeah.
And but we're positioned well. We're really thinking about how to move forward and build the tools and lower cost of labor or make things more efficient. So we'll definitely always be in touch on getting more feedback and building what you need.
I'll take all the tips we can.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining us here today. If you found this content useful, please subscribe and share with a friend in the industry who's part of a retail or delivery team. Follow me on LinkedIn for future episodes where every month we'll dig into different aspects of the cannabis retail ecosystem and share insights to help dispensaries thrive. To learn more about Meadow's cannabis retail software and book a consultation to help you level up your business, head to getmeadow.com. We'd love to hear from you. Take care, everybody.